the motion.
Thank you, Mr Bone. I beg to move that this House has considered government policy on a future independence referendum for Scotland. Today is St Andrew's Day, and on this National Day there is a particular significance and a particular imperative, because last week the UK Supreme Court told the Scottish Government they couldn't exercise their democratic mandate to hold an independence referendum. But there was something else in that judgment, something that simply cannot be tolerated. And that was the suggestion that somehow Scotland, as a nation, doesn't possess a right to self-determination. And in suggesting that, the London Supreme Court overturned what's been the accepted legal, historic, political position that the UK is a voluntary union. Scotland's separate constitutional tradition is perhaps best summed up in the view expressed by Lord Cooper in the case of McCormick versus the Lord Advocate, that the principle of unlimited sovereignty of Parliament is a distinctively English principle, which has no counterpart in Scottish constitutional law. The Supreme Court seems to have repudiated that. Last week's judgment rendered the UK a state of glaring contradiction. Contradictions of our shared history, contradictions of equality, of politics and representation, and indeed the democracy the UK enthusiastically claims it seeks to preserve the world over, yet moves to block Scotland at each and every turn. So can the Minister imagine the circumstance where, having entered the common market and ratified every subsequent treaty leading to the European Union, that the EU Parliament had moved to block his party's Brexit vote, or set a limit on when and indeed if such a vote could be held? The notion is, of course, ludicrous, because democracy is not a single event, it is an evolving and continuous process. That is how civilised people behave, how freedom of thought and freedom of expression are peacefully demonstrated. These are the foundations of inalienable human rights. Chair, I will consider the contradictions, concluding with a commentary on the Supreme Court's judgment. We're often told in this place that Scotland must be proud of our shared history as part of the most successful political union ever. I will test that narrative and ask the Minister to consider our shared history through a Scottish prism. Before the Union, the English Alien Act of 1705 threatened economic sanctions if Scotland did not settle the royal succession or negotiate for a political union. The treaty itself was met with vociferous opposition both inside and outside Scotland's parliamentary chamber. But given threats and enticements, a majority of the Scottish parliamentarians were persuaded. The people were never consulted. It so often goes that this is all ancient history and irrelevant to a modern Scotland in a respectful union of equals. Well, last week's judgment challenged that previously understood narrative. But what of that modern Scotland? In my lifetime, the political complexion of Westminster rule has rarely reflected the polity of Scotland. We have endured repeated Tory governments that Scotland did not vote for, or Labour administrations who took us into illegal wars we wanted no part of, where the socio-economic policies have destroyed our communities, exploited our resources, and worked against the utility of the people of Scotland, contrary to the Articles of Union. It is the pursuit of such policy, social and economic, that has driven a stake through the heart of once proud communities. As noted in the pleadings of the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South West in her prorogation UK Supreme Court case, the 1707 parliamentary union between England and Scotland may have created a new state, but it did not create one nation. Scotland was an independent nation for millennia before its coerced incorporation, and it remains a distinct and internationally recognised people and country. No clearer is this evidenced than by the much earlier and continuing union of the crowns, where our shared monarch does not accede to a single throne of Britain, but takes the separate crowns of the realm of Scotland and England. As a member of the EU, the UK possessed and exercised their veto, yet claimed their sovereignty was impeded by membership. Scotland has no such mechanism in this place and is always subject to the wiles of the policy of its larger neighbour, exemplified by Brexit. How does this constitute access to meaningful political process, as claimed by the UK Supreme Court judgment? In signing the Atlantic Charter of 1941, wartime Prime Minister and hero of the Conservative Party, it was Winston Churchill who brought into being the principle of self-determination of peoples, as now set out in the United Nations Charter in paragraph 2 of Articles 173 and 76. And Margaret Thatcher, in her memoirs, stated that, as a nation, they, Scotland, have an undoubted right to national self-determination. And John Major, when Prime Minister, who said about Scotland, as I have said before, no nation can be held irrevocably against its will.
Angus Brendan Neale.
You started off raising the point about the Supreme Court and self-determination. I found that paragraph 88 was particularly interesting when he said it wasn't entitled to external self-determination because they'd be denied the ability to exert internally that self-determination, which of course the judgment exactly did do that because it did limit that. But I do think the reason for the judgment not giving the referendum was because if it happened, even though it had limited legal effects, as they said in I think paragraph 81, it would possess the authority in a constitution and constitutional political culture founded in democracy, and that's all over Western Europe. So ultimately, the concession that's been made by the Supreme Court is the ballot box rules supreme. Indeed, the ballot box made the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is a creature of the UK government, which in turn was made by the ballot box.
Hanvey.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. I will come on to consider the blurred boundaries of legal and political as I move through my speech today. In 1989, this place reaffirmed and acknowledged the sovereign right of the Scottish people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs. In May 1997, in an exchange between the Right Honourable Alex Salmond during the passage of the Referendum Scotland and Wales Bill, the late Donald Dewar responded that he should be the last to challenge the sovereignty of the people, accepting the right of the Scottish people to a choice, including independence, should that be their wish. None of these senior politicians ever placed a limit, sought to constrain that democratic right to self-determination. Indeed, in the wake of the 2014 referendum, the Smith Commission agreement was signed by all of Scotland's main political parties, and it stated, "It is agreed that nothing in this report prevents Scotland becoming an independent country in the future, should the people of Scotland so choose." Of course, the Good Friday Agreement sets out a reasoned and internationally considered timescale of every 7 years to consider constitutional change. A political generation of 7 years is not unreasonable, but Scotland is now a year beyond and no further forward. It is therefore imperative, if there is a consented legal and democratic route by which the people of Ireland, north and south, can choose their own constitutional future in a border poll every 7 years, then what is the consented legal and democratic route by which Scotland's sovereign right to determine their own constitutional future can be respected? And that is a right underpinned by Scots law, which rests on the claim of right that asserts that it is the people who are sovereign. The Supreme Court's rejection of the argument that Scotland has the right to self-determination in international law was described last week as problematic, very problematic, by Michael Keating Emeritus Professor of Politics at the University of Aberdeen. He states, "The way is now open for the UK government to say that there is no time or way for Scotland to exercise its acknowledged right to self-determination." He has quite rightly pointed out that in invoking the Canadian Court's ruling on Quebec, the UK Supreme Court failed to mention or consider a further aspect of that Canadian judgment, namely that if Quebec or any other province did vote for independence by a clear majority on a clear question, the Government of Canada would be bound to negotiate. This aspect of the Canadian Court's ruling is significant and in essence reflects a situation where legality meets politics.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Be quick.
No, Jim, it made a great speech. I'm grateful again for giving way. The Holyrood standing orders do perhaps possess a way, and the Supreme Court has unwittingly perhaps opened up every election from now on for people to speak at the ballot box. But under Rule 11.10 of the standing orders of Holyrood, the selection of the First Minister, either paragraph 5 with one candidate or paragraph 7 with two candidates, paragraph 8 with two candidates or more, and that with a combination of no confidence votes. Surely that leaves a way open. If it was chosen to take for Scotland to determine its own future, if Holyrood decides to do that.
Neale Hanvey.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. My honourable friend will probably not like my answer, but that is a matter for the Scottish Government to consider.
He's correct. Yeah.
In addition to the point I was making about political reality, Professor Keating goes on to argue that in going beyond the letter of the law and looking at broader constitutional issues, this risks undermining conventions and understandings on which the largely unwritten constitution, the UK's largely unwritten constitution, depends. These are wise reflections which both the UK Government and the UK Supreme Court would do well to consider. And with regards to Kosovo, the United Kingdom has stated in its submission to the International Court of Justice that, and I quote, "considers that the declaration of independence of Kosovo was not incompatible with international law. It was not made in haste or in a political vacuum. Rather, it flowed from the failure of the two sides and the international community after a long and sustained effort to secure any other framework." And further, recognising that developments since the 17th of February 2008 have crystallised Kosovo's independence and cured any deficiency that might initially have existed. As the 1776 Declaration of Independence of the United States...
Very good.
I just wanted to ask a point of clarification on the comparison with Kosovo. Is the Honourable Gentleman really comparing the situation that Scotland finds itself within the United Kingdom with Kosovo in a little war-torn former Yugoslavia?
Neale Hanvey.
I'm referring to the petitioner's arguments, the Supreme Court's response to that, and the UK Government's judgment on the Kosovan situation. I am pursuing a line that was submitted by the petitioner and responded to by the UK Supreme Court. As the 1776 Declaration of Independence of the United States of America illustrates, a declaration of independence which the United Kingdom opposed at the time, many states emerged to independence in what at the time were controversial circumstances. This does not vitiate their subsequent emergence into full statehood. And these developments are succinctly crystallised by Robert McCorquodale, a Professor of International Law and Human Rights, who has himself appeared as an advocate before the International Court of Justice and the UK Supreme Court. They have examined the dissolution of the USSR and its influence on the developments of the right to self-determination. He states, Lithuania's Declaration of Independence had substantial impacts on the understanding and application of the right to self-determination. The right to self-determination, which is a human right, acknowledged by all states, changed from being limited to people with traditional colonial territories to applying to all states. including to peoples within states. This development has profound effects today, such as enabling people in all states worldwide to seek to exercise their right to self-determination. This challenges directly a key assertion of the UK Supreme Court, leading it to conclude that the Scottish Government could not independently consult the Scottish people about independence, and it was in the gift of Westminster. Yet a public petition entitled "The Treaty of Union 1707 is no longer fit for purpose and dissolve the Union" was submitted to this place in 2019 and was rejected by this place for the following reason, and I quote, "We can't accept your petition because this would be a decision of the people of Scotland and not the United Kingdom Government or Parliament." And on this, I wholly agree. Yes. And for all the reasons given above, the UK Supreme Court position cannot stand unchallenged, particularly on our National Day. So today, I invite others to sign the Declaration of St Andrew's Day, published in my name as Early Day Motion 633, which asserts the following: "We, the people, elected members and civic organisations of Scotland, assert that our nation has the right of self-determination to freely determine our political status and to freely pursue our economic and cultural and social development. Mindful of the Scottish constitutional tradition of the sovereignty of the people, we will democratically challenge any authority or government which seeks to deny us that right." On Wednesday, the 23rd of November 2023, it became clear the wrong case had been argued at the wrong time and in the wrong court. Just as Westminster and the United Kingdom Supreme Court are part of the British state apparatus, so too is the Scottish Parliament. But if Scotland's Parliament is denied agency over the future of its people, where stands democracy for the Scottish people? In Scots law, there is no sovereignty higher than that of our people. And here today, I have asserted that right into the record. Neither Scotland's claim of right or the aspirations of the Scottish people to be a normal, outward-looking, independent nation are the sole purview of any one political party or any individual party leader. And as we now learn, the UK Secretary of State intends to act as a territorial viceroy, banning the Scottish civil service from advancing the democratic will of the Scottish people. Well, I give him fair warning. The independence movement extends far beyond the Scottish civil service. If anything, such an undemocratic move will simply galvanise and liberate the movement, decoupling our ambition from the daily trials of government. We are the nation of the Enlightenment, and our movement possesses minds with more ambition and vision than any government or civil service that is subject to diktats from London. At the start of my contribution, I said that this was an issue of contradictions. Well, let me say today on St Andrew's Day that there is no contradiction in Scotland. Scotland is a proud and ancient nation, going back millennia, and no one but the people of Scotland shall impede, limit or restrict our right to self-determination. It is precisely a week since the Supreme Court gave its judgment on the right of the Scottish Parliament to hold a referendum on Scottish independence. Well, let me be clear, to paraphrase Charles Stewart Parnell, who said about another nation which was once a part of the United Kingdom, "No man has the right to fix a boundary to the march of a nation. No man, no court, no government has the right to say to another country, thus far and no further." Thank you, Mr. Bone.
Well done.
The question is that this House has considered government policy on a further independence referendum from Scotland. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Bowen. It's a real privilege to be responding to this debate with you in the chair. Can I also congratulate the Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath for securing this debate. I'm pleased to be here responding to my first Westminster Hall debate as a Scotland Office Minister. Now, the honourable member chose to focus this debate on the issue of an independence referendum. But I cannot help but feel that this was valuable debating time which could have been better used to focus on matters of immediate importance to my constituents in the Scottish Borders, in the honourable member's constituency in Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, and to other members' constituents across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. The honourable member made many references to... I'm going to make some progress